Black teen rejected by every university, then built his own school. He dreamed of wearing a graduation gown, walking across a stage, and proving to the world that hard work mattered more than skin color. His grades were flawless, his test scores among the highest in his state, and his recommendations glowed with praise. But when the acceptance letters should have arrived, only rejection after rejection piled up instead. Not one university opened its doors. Some excuses were thin, others blunt, but the message beneath them all was the same. He didn't belong. The pain cut deeper than failure. It wasn't failure at all. It was injustice, a future stolen, not because of what he lacked, but because of who he was. Most would have given up, settling for less than they deserved. But this teenager refused. Out of rejection came a vision, one that would not only change his life, but spark a revolution for others like him. The question is, how does a rejected teen build a school of his own? He grew up in a neighborhood where opportunity was a rumor, not a reality. Cracked sidewalks led to broken schools, and dreams too often faded into survival. Yet from a young age, this black teenager carried something different within him, a relentless hunger to learn. While others played outside, he devoured books he borrowed from a worn-out library down the street. History, science, mathematics, it didn't matter what it was, he wanted to understand it all. His teachers noticed early on. They saw the spark in his eyes, the way he solved problems that others couldn't, the way he asked questions not to impress but to truly know. His mother, working double shifts to keep food on the table, often returned home to find him sitting under a dim lamp, notes spread across the kitchen counter. She would sigh, sometimes urging him to sleep, but deep down, her heart swelled with pride. She believed that education was the way out, the key that could unlock a brighter future for her son. And he believed it too. By high school, he was not only at the top of his class, but tutoring others for free. Students who had once given up found themselves staying late in the library just to learn from him. Teachers marveled at his discipline. Administrators called him a role model. College was supposed to be the next chapter, the natural step for someone with his drive and determination. He had dreams of attending a university that valued innovation, a place where he could study education itself and bring change back to communities like his own. He filled out applications carefully, polishing essays late into the night. He told his story honestly, about overcoming poverty, about refusing to be defined by statistics, about wanting to create opportunities for kids who felt invisible. Every word was sincere. Every sentence crafted with the hope that somewhere, someone reading would see him not just as another applicant, but as a promise for the future. The day he mailed off those envelopes or clicked submit on those online portals, he felt a surge of hope. It was as though every struggle, every sleepless night, every sacrifice his mother had made was finally leading somewhere. Friends congratulated him. Teachers assured him he would have his pick of schools, and his community watched with quiet pride, waiting for the success story that seemed inevitable. But then came the waiting. Weeks turned into months. He checked his email constantly, his heart leaping every time a new notification arrived. Finally, the responses began to trickle in. One after another, they carried the same crushing word. "We regret to inform you." At first, he told himself it was just one rejection. Then another came, and another. Soon, the stack of denial letters grew taller than his stack of acceptance dreams. Excuses varied. "We have limited space. We had a record number of applicants. We are unable to offer you admission at this time." But behind the polite phrasing, he began to sense a different truth. How could someone with his scores, his record, and his dedication be overlooked by every single school? The answer, though unspoken, stung deeply sometimes. No matter how perfect your resume, the world sees only the color of your skin, and that realization would ignite a fire in him stronger than any rejection could ever extinguish. At first, he tried to convince himself it was just bad luck. Maybe the universities had simply been overwhelmed with applicants. Maybe his essays hadn't stood out the way he thought. He reread them line by line, searching for flaws. But no matter how much he looked, the truth gnawed at him. It wasn't his performance. It was something far bigger, far older than him. The more letters he collected, the more his neighborhood began to notice. Friends who once believed in him avoided asking about the results. Teachers who had promised him success offered sympathetic looks instead. His mother tried to console him, reminding him that rejection didn't define his worth, but he could see the disappointment in her eyes. The quiet pain of a parent, watching her child denied the very opportunity she had worked so hard to make possible. One evening, sitting on the porch of his small apartment, he watched kids from the neighborhood playing in the street. A few had dropped out of school already, too weighed down by the cycle of poverty. Others barely showed up to class, convinced that no matter what they did, the world had already made up its mind about them. He thought about his own rejections, about how institutions designed to open doors had instead slammed them shut in his face. And in that moment, an idea sparked. If the universities wouldn't accept him, maybe he didn't need them. It sounded ridiculous at first, laughable even. He was just a teenager, barely scraping by, without wealth, without connections, without power. What could he possibly build? But the thought refused to fade. Instead of letting the rejection destroy him, he wondered, what if he turned it into something greater? He began small. He gathered a handful of children from his block, those who struggled with homework or couldn't afford tutoring, and started teaching them in the evenings. They sat around his kitchen table, their notebooks pressed against the chipped wood, their pencils dull from overuse. At first, it was chaos, too many distractions, not enough resources. But as the days passed, something remarkable happened. The kids began to learn. They listened, they asked questions, they improved. Their eyes lit up with the same hunger for knowledge he once had. Word spread. Soon, parents were knocking on his door, asking if their children could join too. He didn't say no. His kitchen table overflowed. When there was no more room, he moved to the church basement down the street, borrowing space wherever he could. He stayed up late planning lessons, photocopying pages from old textbooks, and creating makeshift chalkboards from scraps of wood. But it wasn't just about the lessons. He taught them discipline, confidence, and hope. He told them they mattered, even when the world told them otherwise. He reminded them that rejection didn't mean they weren't enough, and yet the more he gave, the more resistance he faced. Some mocked him, saying he was wasting his time. Others whispered that he was trying to be something he wasn't, even local. Officials questioned his right to gather. Children without a proper institution. At times, doubt gnawed at him. Maybe they were right. Maybe he was too young, too inexperienced, too powerless. But every time a child's grades improved, every time a parent thanked him with tears in their eyes, he knew he couldn't stop. He was building more than lessons. He was building belief. And though he didn't know it yet, this humble beginning, this kitchen table, classroom born from rejection, was the first brick in what would one day become his very own school. The church basement could no longer hold the students. What had begun with 5 kids at his kitchen table had now grown into dozens. Each evening, the small space filled with the scrape of chairs, the shuffle of notebooks, the eager voices of children ready to learn. Parents pitched in where they could, donating old supplies, cooking food for the long sessions, even standing guard outside to keep the streets safe. But growth also brought attention, and not all of it was good. One afternoon, as he was erasing the chalkboard, a man in a suit stepped into the basement. He carried a clipboard, his expression sharp with disapproval. "You can't run a school here," he said flatly. "You're not accredited. You're not licensed. You're not qualified." The words hit like a hammer. For weeks after, whispers spread that he was a fraud, that he was misleading families, that what he was doing wasn't real education. The boy, still barely more than a teenager, felt the weight of those accusations. He lay awake at night, staring at the cracked ceiling above his bed, wondering if it was true. Who was he to think he could do this? He had no degree, no university behind his name, no institution to validate his efforts. Every rejection letter he had received replayed in his mind, each one a reminder of what society thought of him. And yet when he considered giving up, the faces of his students rose before him. Children who had once failed every test were now raising their hands with confidence. Parents who had lost hope now believed in a future for their kids. He realized that while the world had closed its doors to him, he had opened a door for others, and that mattered more than any official stamp of approval. Still, the pressure mounted. One evening, he walked into the basement to find parents gathered, murmuring with concern. They had heard that authorities might shut them down. Some worried about the risks. Others feared their children would be left adrift again. His chest tightened as he listened. This was the moment that could break everything he had built. Instead, he stood before them, trembling but resolute. He spoke from the heart, not as a teacher, not as a leader, but as someone who had felt the sting of rejection and refused to pass it on. They told me I didn't belong in their schools, he said, voice steady despite the lump in his throat. But I belong here, and so do your children. If they want to take this away from us, they'll have to see what we've built with their own eyes. Days later, that test arrived. A local reporter, tipped off by rumors of a basement classroom, came to see for herself. She expected chaos, unqualified teaching, wasted time. Instead, she found children solving math problems with precision, reading essays with passion, discussing history with insight. She saw discipline, focus, and most importantly, hope. Her article spread like wildfire. Teen builds school after universities reject him. The headline read, "For the first time, the narrative shifted. What some had dismissed as foolishness was now seen as vision. Donations began to trickle in. Volunteers offered to help. Community leaders, once skeptical, now wanted to support. But the real victory wasn't in the praise or attention. It was in the look on the children's faces the next day, when they walked into that basement taller, prouder, knowing the world finally saw what they already knew, that they were worth teaching, worth believing in, worth fighting for. The teenager, once rejected by every university, had reached his breaking point and turned it into his breakthrough. The article changed everything. Within weeks, the basement classroom transformed from a quiet secret into a community movement. Boxes of donated books appeared at his door. Local businesses dropped off school supplies, desks, even computers that had been sitting unused in storage. Parents who once hesitated now lined up with their children, eager for a chance to join something that felt larger than life. The teenager, once dismissed, once told he didn't belong, suddenly found himself leading something greater than he had ever imagined. With the support of volunteers, he organized proper classes, dividing students by age and subject. A retired teacher offered to mentor him. A neighbor who knew carpentry built shelves for the growing library. Slowly, the makeshift classroom began to look less like a basement gathering and more like the beginnings of a real school. But the most powerful transformation wasn't in the building. It was in the students. Children who had once been labeled as troublemakers now arrived early, their notebooks in hand, hungry to learn. Those who had been written off as slow began reciting poetry, solving equations, and dreaming of futures they had once thought impossible. Parents, many of whom had lost faith in the education system, saw their children's confidence bloom before their eyes. For the young founder, the journey was bittersweet. Every success reminded him of the rejections he had endured. He couldn't help but wonder how many other bright students were out there, denied opportunities because of their race, their background, or the stereotypes placed upon them. His pain became his fuel. He promised himself that his school would be more than a temporary refuge. It would be a beacon of hope for generations. He worked tirelessly, often running on little sleep, balancing lesson plans with fundraising efforts, studying education theory late into the night to give his students the best he could. When exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him, he remembered the rejection letters stacked in his drawer. They no longer represented failure. They were reminders of why he had chosen this path, because no child should feel unwanted in the pursuit of learning. Years later, what began at a kitchen table had grown into a fully established school, a building of its own, painted bright, with hallways filled with laughter and classrooms buzzing with curiosity. It bore his name, not out of ego, but out of defiance. A permanent reminder that the boy they had rejected built something they could never take away. Graduates of his school went on to colleges, scholarships, and careers once thought out of reach. Some returned to teach, determined to give back to the place that had given them a chance. Others carried the lessons of resilience and hope into every step of their lives. His vision had not only changed a handful of children, it had shifted the trajectory of an entire community. And yet, beneath the triumph, a hard truth remained. Why had it taken rejection, struggle, and a teenager's rebellion to create what institutions should have provided all along? Why had a young black student, armed with talent and determination, been denied entry into the very halls of learning that claimed to stand for equality? His story became a symbol of injustice, yes, but also of power. Power in refusing to be defined by rejection. Power in turning pain into purpose. Power in creating change where others had closed the door. The boy who once sat under a dim lamp, dreaming of a future, had built one not only for himself, but for countless others. His life became a testament to a truth too often ignored. When systems fail, resilience rises. And so the question lingers, one that demands more than applause or admiration. How many more brilliant minds must be rejected before the world finally learns?